the Smallmouth Crush podcast. If you're a hardcore angler, you've come to the right place. This is a weekly podcast that will interview some of the top smallmouth bass anglers in North America. Travis and his guest will discuss what it takes to consistently catch big smallmouth, and you'll get a glimpse inside the mind of a trophy smallmouth angler. And now, here's your host of the Smallmouth Crush podcast, Travis Manson.
Hello, welcome to the Smallmouth Crush podcast, Season 1. We have 2 more podcasts left, interviewing some of the top smallmouth anglers across the country. What a journey. So much information. I hope you guys took some good notes. I'm sorry that you had to spend so much money on tackle. I am guilty as well. Okay, I went to town on a lot of these recommendations, and I feel like I have a lot more tools when I'm out there on the water. So I'm learning a lot. I hope you guys are as well. So I know we have a great show lined up, but before we go there, we got to talk about, of course, the Reel Shot, guys. The Reel Shot's been with us all of Season 1. And of course, it's the premier tackle store. It's a tackle store I recommend for all your tackle needs. They got everything you could imagine when it comes to bass fishing, walleye, salmon, and trout, and hunting. Bunch of hunting equipment, gear, everything. So head on over to thereelshot.com. Use my code SmallmouthCrush15. Get 15% off your order. Same-day shipping, fast delivery. Get you ready for your next big bass adventure. Let's bring our next guest on. Mike, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Travis?
Good.
Thanks for having me, man.
Are you in the dungeon or what? What's going on back there?
That's where all the tying happens, is in the dungeon.
All the tying. I love it.
And by tying, I don't mean any crazy stuff. I'm just talking about hair jigs.
I hear you. Man, I love fishing hair jigs. There's something about a hair jig when it comes to smallmouth. They love it. And I'm going to have a bunch of questions for you when it comes to smallmouth fishing. But before we go there, Mike, if you could just take a few minutes and introduce yourself and let us know what part of the country you're from and your home body of water and why you love smallmouth fishing so much.
My name is Mike Iovino. Most people in my inner circle, I guess you could say, know me as Weensy. It's a nickname that's kind of followed me from college onward into my professional career, even stuck like glue. I am from Connecticut, though not originally from the Bronx, New York. I'm a freshwater guide and angler. I guess my home body of water would be Candlewood Lake here in Connecticut, which is kind of the premier bass fishery in the state of Connecticut, at least. 5,300 acre lake, which is pretty small in comparison to some of the other smallmouth fisheries that we have, or at least the more notable ones, like, the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain, and those larger bodies of water that are more known for smallmouth. But yeah, I'm a tournament angler, freshwater guide, grew up saltwater fishing, believe it or not, in the Bronx. And my uncle was first mate on a charter boat, got me involved in fishing when I was super, super young. When the family moved to Connecticut, it was time to get into freshwater fishing because it was just saltwater was relatively inaccessible because we lived inland of the coast. Started pond fishing, and then it just kind of took off from there. I got into the junior Bassmaster program when I was 11 years old. I've been, freshwater tournament angler ever since.
Do you miss the salt at all?
I still visit it plenty. I get back to it every once in a while. It's not, for me, honestly, a lot of guys actually go the other way. They go start freshwater fishing and then end up saltwater fishing. For me, it's more of like an intricacy type of thing. So yeah, I think that freshwater fish are a lot more complicated and difficult to figure out than saltwater fish are. That's what's kind of been the thing keeping me in, pursuit of particularly smallmouth, but smallmouth and largemouth bass.
So Candlewood Lake, it's a well-known fishery, a lot of great largemouth and smallmouth on that lake. When you think of Candlewood, it's relatively a regional lake, I would say. Like, a lot of people in that region fish it, but you don't find a whole lot of people from far away coming there, which might be a good thing, but it's really, truly a world-class fishery for that area. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. It's tough because of the pressure, to be completely honest. I mean, it can be tough in general. The fish there can be pretty finicky, but you really gotta know what you're looking for. There's a lot of subtleties that I've been able to employ over the years to catching fish really all throughout the season, just because of the pressure and how the fish react to it. It only being, a little less than 5,400 acres, it's like 5,380 or something like that. You can imagine getting 150 bass boats on a body of water that's like, a bay on Lake Champlain, essentially. It's a lot of pressure on a very small body of water, and the fish is even smaller. You really have to kind of figure out the subtleties, the ways the fish are acting, and really dial it in to be successful there on a continuous basis.
Well, I'm going to definitely drill you a little bit when it comes to some of these little things that help you put more smallmouth in the boat, because
Sure.
It's really important, especially when you're dealing with a lake like Candlewood, where it's somewhat small, but a lot of fishing pressure, relatively clear. And the structure, I mean, I've fished it a handful of times. It looks like every area should hold fish. And I don't know if that's the case, but I've seen some of the weights that come out of that place. Describe a typical tournament. What type of weights are you seeing?
In the springtime, I mean, as far as 5 fish goes, if you're talking about like a team tournament, you're going to have upwards of 22 to even think about it. There's times where it's like tournaments are won with 27, 28 for 5. Even believe it or not, in like June, July, and August, recently, the bite has gotten really, really good in the middle of the summer. In the spring, usually it's mostly smallmouth. Guys are coming in with the occasional bag that has one big largemouth mixed in. You're talking 22 to 25 of all smallies to think about winning a team event there with 5 fish.
That's pretty good weight. So when it comes to chasing these fish in highly pressured bodies of water, I think a lot of people that are listening to this or watching this can relate. And, we see a lot of pressure when it comes to some of the smallmouth waters that are out there. And so I really want to dig into some of these things that you've done to put some of these good bags together. But if you could, maybe we start out on a seasonal pattern and kind of walk me through a whole year of fishing, Candlewood for smallmouth. What's the earliest you typically can get out there and start targeting fish in the spring?
Usually it's the last week of March. So it used to be that the lake would close April 1st through the 3rd Saturday in April. That then changed to the 2nd Saturday in April, and then I think it was 2 years ago they got rid of the closed fishing season here in Connecticut. So as soon as the ice is off the water now, guys are getting out there and fishing, and with great success too. I mean, wow. Ice out on Candlewood is really, really good. Candlewood's a unique lake because everything that's in there, all the structure, is essentially man-made. It was 5 towns that in 1926 they flooded everything. One of the only, I think it's one of 2 hydroelectric lakes that the water actually flows uphill into the lake. There's all these foundations and walls. You think about 1926, all the property lines were divided by stone walls. I mean, you
Right.
still see them up here in the Northeast. If you're driving around, you see stone walls going through the woods. So it's essentially the same thing. It's just underwater. Those really provide a lot of habitat for fish, particularly smallmouth. And there's old road beds, lots of foundations, water wells. It's crazy what you see with like side imaging. You see literally it looks like a giant donut down there, and they'll be fish in it too. So they use all of that old man-made structure, and a lot of the fish use those walls and roadbeds particularly as highways between the shallow and deep water, because they usually lead right up to the bank where there are all those homes currently. So they don't really fluctuate the water anymore, other than for the winter drawdowns, which they really do for 2 reasons. One's to manage the Eurasian milfoil. Homeowners are not and recreational users are not thrilled with your Asian milfoil. And then secondly is for people to perform repairs on like seawalls and stuff like that, and docks and things that break. But other than that, the water level stays pretty consistent throughout the year. It may fluctuate about a foot in one direction or another from full pool, but it's not really an active hydroelectric lake. It's more, they basically draw from it and add to it once a year.
This structure that you're talking about, the foundations, the fence lines, things like that, is any of this marked on a map, or do you have to go out there and find them all yourself with electronics?
A lot of them are marked.
They are.
Yeah. A lot of them are available on your more, intricate mapping, the more updated mapping that's available out there, like Navionics and, Hummingbird's mapping. I know they have a lot of that stuff. Not all of it, though.
Sure. I was going to say there's probably a bunch of stuff that if you put your time in, you could find something special, I would imagine.
Yeah. So I had the unique opportunity to actually work for the company that owned and operated the lake, the actual hydroelectric facility. They had all of these old books and aerial photos and crazy pictures of what used to be down there and where it was. And so I got to see all of that stuff, which was really cool. It is really cool to see, a foundation that you're fishing. I saw the house that used to be there. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking early spring or just ice out, that water temp's got to still be what, in high mid 30s?
Yeah. You're talking, upper 30s, and when it gets to the lower 40s, that's when the bite really starts to pick up.
What's a handful of good techniques that time of year to catch some of these big smallmouth?
The standards, the staples are, going to be, you might still catch them on a blade bait, the ones that are kind of still transitioning out of the wintering areas. Once they've started to move, though, Kitech Swimbait, I mean, this little deal is the 2.8. That
2.8 Kitech, sure.
Yeah, that's pretty deadly. And the hair jig is kind of second to none. I mean, this is a little marabou one. We might get more into the materials and stuff like that later, but this is the standard synthetic hair jig that I'll use 95% of the time. But crawling that guy around on those stone walls in the transition areas where the key is to kind of find the stone walls and those old road beds that move from a wintering area to the shallower flats. And I mean, they're super predictable. You can follow them using those road beds and rock walls and stuff like that all throughout the year to where they're going to be in the summer, to then the transition from the summer back into the fall and then back into the winter. They use the same sort of stuff every year to get from place to place. So once you kind of have it down, you can get those milk runs in to where you know where to go and when. But other than the hair jig and the swim bait, fish do get shallow in a hurry too. And for those, the jerk bait that's going to catch them. Whether it be a Vision 110 or some guys prefer like a Husky jerk or Pointer 100. That 100 size and the 110 size seems to be the deal there, because the forage is alewives. So they hone in on slightly larger bait fish that time of year.
So looking at the hair jigs, the two that you showed in front of you, we have marabou, and then you have a synthetic. I want to call, what would you call that?
I guess you would call it craft hair.
Craft hair, yep.
That's just a synthetic material. So the marabou is, what a lot of guys are used to using. You see anybody who reads Bassmaster magazine or has watched, pretty much any video on smallmouth fishing on YouTube over the past 5 years knows a marabou jig. The marabou, you can see the hair it moves a lot. It's super responsive to water, and it flails a lot. It's super fluffy though, so when it's in the water, it condenses down a lot. The craft hair and the synthetic is a little different. It reacts in the water a lot differently than the marabou does. Has a lot more subtle of a response. It's a little less cellular of a material, so it doesn't absorb as much water. so it doesn't get as compact as marabou does. And because of that, the hair is not going to be as responsive and billowing as a marabou. So you fish these two jigs totally differently from one another. The marabou, you kind of swim around.
Yep.
A lot of guys are familiar with that. The synthetic, this is a slow drag deal. You're counting rocks with this guy. And I fish both of them on the same tackle, really. I use a little bit longer of a rod for the marabou than I do for the synthetic, just because I'm trying to get longer casts with the marabou, because I'm reeling it around. The synthetic, I'm using 6-pound fluoro. I prefer Invizix. I use Seaguar Invizix for pretty much everything that I use for fluoro. 7-foot medium light. You can even get away with using like a drop shot rod. I'm not a braid to fluoro guy. I know a lot of people are. They like it a lot. Just not my thing. It just seems like a lot of the times I'm fishing, it just tends to be windy. For me, I've gotten so many wind knots with braid that I just kind of tend to avoid it a little bit.
I can see that. Yep.
For no other reason, really. But yeah, pretty much the same gear, just two different applications. And the marabou isn't going to be as good in that deep water situation. This is more of a shallow water deal. Once they've gotten up into those shallower flats, this is going to be the deal. The synthetic really works well and shines when they're really down on the rocks and eating out of the rocks, feeding down instead of looking up.
What is your standard size that you're throwing as far as weight goes?
It does vary based on the depth that I'm fishing and how windy it is too.
Mm-hmm.
If I can get away with an 1/8, I'll throw an 1/8. It's probably the most natural presentation you can get away with as far as hair is concerned. But sometimes I'm fishing 20 plus feet of water or in some serious wind. Mm-hmm. And when you got to drag a tiny little hair jig around in the wind, I go up to a 1/4.
A 1/4. Okay. So an 1/8 or a 1/4. I see both of those that you have displayed for the listeners. They're straight black. Is that the standard color?
That's pretty standard. I mean, when you get into some other materials, I'll tie some different colors. This is a silver fox with olive. That's a pretty good one right there. I tie a lot of the silver fox. This is orange fox. This is the olive fox. This is Arctic. Again, this is the silver fox too. Tie a lot of fox. I'll also tie, this is coyote. Coyote is a lot stiffer, but there's different materials that I use for different jigs. But the synthetic is really the all around, I would say, best for cold water, other than maybe like you can dabble with bear hair, which is like really, really stiff and it doesn't move like at all, but it'll only work for like 2 to 3 weeks out of the year. So I try to stick with the synthetic. It'll work, all the way from that 36-degree water temperature all the way up to 55 when they start to think about spawning.
Okay. So colder water temps, you're using the synthetic, the craft hair, and you're throwing either an 1/8 or a 1/4, and you're pretty much dragging that,
Yep.
correct? Are you using
Definitely.
any type of trailer?
No, not when I'm smallmouth fishing. When I'm smallmouth fishing, it seems like you got to continue to move the jig along the bottom. For some reason, when I fish for largemouth with a hair jig, sometimes I'll include a really, really small trailer on it. And the only reason I'll use that is because I have to like literally leave the hair jig sitting there on the bottom for a while right in front of them for them to eat it, because they tend to be a little less aggressive. If I do that without a trailer, the hair jig will tilt over on its side. If I use the little trailer on it, it'll keep it from falling over on its side. It'll just stand there flat on the bottom usually. So just helps me creep it a little slower. I don't want anything that's going to add any action to it though. So if I use a trailer, like one that I used to use before they discontinued them was the Cabin Creek Leech. And I used to actually cut it down and put just like a section of that leech on there just to give it like body, stop the hair jig from rolling over on its side. You can get away with, tying on on a football head too. That helps a little bit. It's not as effective as I've found to have like that little trailer on there with a flat bottom on it. So even like an Erie darter type style bait, something with a flat bottom on it that has really not a lot of substance to it.
So the Cabin Creek trailers are discontinued. If you wanted to pair something with that, what would be your next best bet if you wanted to stick with like the same color?
You could probably get away with using like a small TRD bugs. That might work. Anything that has like that flat bottom to it, that's 2.5, maybe 3 inches at most.
Okay.
You're going to be able to get away with, even if you got to modify something and cut a Senko in half. I've done that before too.
Got it. Well, that's interesting. So really with that craft hair, if we're fishing for smallmouth, you're continuously trying to, I imagine you kind of shaking that rod and moving along, right?
Yep.
Over that. And then for largemouth, if you do decide to target those, which on a lake like Candlewood, you certainly can, you're going to slow it down a little bit and you feel like that trailer helps.
Definitely.
So once that water temp starts warming up and you said that craft hair is good until about 55 degrees, then you're going to actually start using the marabou jig when they get up shallower and start throwing that around. And I assume that's just more of a steady retrieve through the water column for you.
You know, everything that you've read about marabou jigs, that it's essentially that.
The same. Okay.
Yeah.
So when we have mid 50s approaching 60, what are you starting to focus on at that time?
Right before they spawn, on Candlewood at least, you get a really good finesse swimbait bite. I use, there's the Lunker City Swimfish, there's the Kitech Easy Shiner, or even just the regular Swing Impact in the 4-inch sizes, and just an 1/8 ounce jig head, ball head jig with a 3/0 hook on it. And you just kind of creep that around in some shallow water. That'll pick up a lot of those roamers that are just moving up. In addition to, the staples, the springtime staples, like your suspending jerkbaits are still working in that 55-degree range. The flat-sided crankbait is stellar there at times. Once they get into that, 6 foot or less, that's pretty lights out for both smallmouth and largemouth.
Okay.
And then once they get on beds, that's a whole other ball game. I'll continue to use those swim baits. That finesse swim bait is a really cool little dual deal. So I'll creep it around for those fish that are still pre-spawn. And I fish that swim bait a little differently than a lot of people typically would too. I cast it out. I'm using spinning gear, 8-pound test, 7.2 spinning rod. Again, straight fluoro. But instead of, your standard swimbait fishing where you're pointing your rod tip down and just that slow, steady retrieve that everybody, that's how everybody fishes those paddle-tail swimbaits. I actually point my rod tip up and I'm kind of gliding it down and lifting it and gliding it and lifting it. It allows me to fish it a lot slower in really shallow water. And that picks up a lot of fish that are roaming around. But if I see a bed mid-retrieve that I may not have seen initially, and when I first casted, I'll let that sink into the bed too. Usually they'll at least react to it. But then when it's full bore spawn, you move into your Ned rigs, your drop shots. I don't know if there is a bait that makes them angrier than a Beast Coast Magic Flick on like a short leader drop shot. It just drives them absolutely nuts. So that's definitely something that I use really frequently, particularly when it gets later in the spawn and the fish are less apt to react to stuff, because don't forget, it's a 5,400 acre lake that has tournaments on it 3 to 4 days out of the week. These fish are seeing everything.
Right.
They're getting, there's nothing that these fish are not seeing, and they're getting wise to stuff. So whereas in the beginning of the spawn, you could drop anything in there and you're at least going to get a reaction out of these fish, as long as you keep enough distance. As it gets later in the spawn, sometimes you'll see this big bright bed that you say, like, there has to be a fish on that. And you can't get him to react to anything. And you're just like, oh, the fish must be gone. No, he's still there. He's still there. You just gotta work for him and find what he's gonna react to. So that takes some trial and error. Some different stuff over the years has worked really well, but you just got to show him some different stuff. But you can tell Candlewood is interesting because it's relatively clear, but it's just dingy enough to where you can't really see fish. Like when they're on a bed in 4 feet of water or more, you're not seeing the actual fish most of the time when you're fishing a bed. And that's also where a lot of guys mess up. So I continuously go behind guys fishing a shoreline, and they're fishing it slow. They're fishing every bed they see, and I'll go behind them and focus on 6 to 8 feet of water and really, really slow down and look for those light spots, and I'll catch 4 and 5 pound smallmouth that these guys just literally ran over because they were fishing that 3 feet of water. So that's definitely something that you gotta focus on a heavily pressured body of water like Candlewood. There's those fish that don't get as much pressure, and typically they tend to be the bigger ones. The bigger ones on Candlewood are super smart. It's not their first rodeo. They've been fished for before. They know that if they make a nest in deeper water, they're not going to get bothered as much. They definitely know what they're doing. So you have to kind of be smart about your approach and not get right on top of them either. So a lot of times I'll just kind of start coasting my boat down a bank or an area where I know that they're spawning, and I'll keep it in 10 feet of water, and I'm going slow, and I'm just looking at every angle I could possibly take, because a lot of times there's like little tiny subtleties that you pick up on, and there'll be a 5-pounder on it. You would never know it was a bed if you weren't really keyed in on what to look for. And I mean, those fish can be caught, honestly, I hate saying this, but they can be caught in pretty much anything. A tube, a drop shot, a shaky head, a flick shake, a Ned, even a hair jig sometimes. Anything that you bring through their beds, they're going to react to, because they likely haven't seen a bait in quite some time. They've seen a lot of boats flying over them, but they haven't seen baits. Wow. So they're pretty easy to piss off, but they're also shy when you get your boat right on top of them.
This is incredible information. I got a bunch of questions. I have to circle back before they get on the spawn, because you mentioned 2 things, flat-sided crankbaits, and then you did mention that Kitech, but I got to ask you some questions when it comes to that, because I'm curious before we move forward. But then we got to get into the summertime. There's so much going on here, guys. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to the Smallmouth Crush podcast. Don't rush out to the water just yet. We'll be right back after this break.
Hey, I teamed up with Beast Coast Fishing to design this killer little jig. Whether you're fishing for smallmouth, largemouth, even spotted bass, this thing is sneaky. Designed with proven fish-catching characteristics. It's a tiny little finesse football jig. It's called the Open Water Sniper. Of course, it's Smallmouth Crush approved. They come in a wide variety of different colors. This one here is Sexy Melon. We got Mothman, Straight Black, Green Pumpkins. So you notice they actually have a few less strands than your standard football jig. No weed guard. You're going to be throwing this the same place you're going to throw an open water, say, exposed hook tube. So anytime you're around that type of structure, it's going to work real well in rocks, hard bottom, and all you're going to be doing is dragging this along. You can do a drag and stop, a continuous retrieve. You can put a little tiny swim bait on the back of that. There's so many different ways you can fish this jig. I've put a TRD on the back of it and looked at them on the graph and dropped straight down and just let it sit there. They're going to hit it. They're going to bite it. The whole point of this jig is to actually emphasize the trailer that you're going to use. So notice the small strands. The hook is very stout. It's perfect. It's got an awesome keeper for your plastics. I've caught so many fish on this year. It will put more fish in the boat. Go check them out. Hey, listen, they got a lot of other great products as well. BeastCoastFishing.com and pick yourself up the OW, Open Water Sniper Jig, Smallmouth Crush approved. All right, can't let you off the hook that easy. You mentioned flat-sided cranks before the spawn. I know you want to keep moving along here, but we got to take you back. And you did mention the finesse swim baits, but I'm not sure how you're retrieving that. So you mentioned you're throwing it out there and you're kind of letting it glide down, but pre-spawn, are you doing that slow, steady retrieve horizontally through the water, or is that bait being crawled on the bottom? That's what I'm curious about when it comes to the swim baits.
So definitely up in the water column. You want it to be about 2 feet off the bottom is where I found kind of that sweet spot. You can nick the rocks, the larger boulders that come off of the bottom quite a bit, but those fish are looking up. You really want to be moving that bait, kind of mid water column. I mean, you're fishing maybe 4 to 8 feet of water, sometimes a little less maybe, depending on the day and the temperature and the wind. But yeah, it's kind of a unique deal keeping your rod tip pointed at like 11 o'clock, because when, it sort of doesn't really feel very natural. You know what I mean? You're reeling like this, It can be a little awkward when they hit it. You gotta get it kind of down to a science with feeling the bite and then how to respond to it. So you gotta basically just reel down as much as you can and just keep reeling and then kind of lift into them. It's sort of like a drop shot hook set, because they're hitting it and coming towards you also, because they'll track the bait for quite a distance. But man, they knock a lot of slack in your line that way. It's a really interesting technique, and you pick up a lot of fish that like guys may miss on a jerkbait or on a crankbait, a bait that's constantly moving. I don't think there's a bait that's constantly moving that you could fish as slowly as that. I mean, it is definitely a unique little deal.
So let's talk about the flat-sided cranks.
I need to know. You're in luck. I had one right here.
There it is. So that's the bling, huh?
That is. Good
the
eye.
Bling.
I got a bunch of those.
I got a bunch of them too that I can't catch a fish on. So you got to tell me how to use those things. I'm serious.
Oh my God.
They probably went out in one of my last auctions. I don't even know if I still have them. So what's the secret with that?
I will take all of the ones that you have, please,
oh,
sir.
Man, now I got to go to restock. For real?
Yeah, that's a pretty sick little crankbait.
Okay.
So there's like 5 or 6 that I use. Sonic side, that's pretty good. And I mean, obviously the bling on the plastic end, and then you get into the balsa stuff, the little Hermie, that's a deal for when they're real shallow. That's got more of an aggressive kick and wobble to it than most flat sides have, just because it's a lot wider. It's pretty dang beefy.
Dude, I don't know what a little Hermie is. What the heck is that? Should I know?
Well, maybe we can edit that out of this video. And nobody will have to know.
We'll see. We'll see.
It's a crankbait made by, his name's Herman Oswald. He's I think it's actually Cedar. He's a Cedar bait maker. And I'm not sure where he's based out of. Eric and I have had a few conversations about the little Hermie.
They're still in production?
He actually sold some of them. Yeah, so they're still in production, but getting some is, I mean, they sell out like instantly whenever they're in stock anywhere. So you got to like get the drop on them in order to get them. So
that bling you put up that we saw, that was red crawdad color. Are those the colors you're using that time of year, or are you switching through some natural bait fish colors as well, or what do you focus on?
Pretty much red and orange, the standard spring craw color. Occasionally, believe it or not, I'll throw either an all black, but that's only really when the water's super muddy. Other than that,
makes sense. Yeah,
that craw seems to do the trick. Something about it really pisses them off.
Now, you mentioned the Sonic side, the bling, the little Hermie. There's some more, right? We're not done yet. Yeah, there's a couple more. On the balsa side, I mean, there's a bunch of really good bait makers out there, wooden crankbaits. There's a guy, well, I mean, obviously, I think one of the better known ones is probably Frankenstein, right? He makes some really nice baits. Those have definitely been used.
There's another guy, Baits, that I've been able to get my hands on a couple of times, who I use very sparingly because they work really, really well, but they're not as easy to get. Coulter cranks, he makes some nice ones as well.
Coultered?
Yeah, Coulter. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I circled back.
Yeah, and
more baits to buy.
On the plastic side too. What else? The Evergreen, that one's pretty good also. Their flat side is, I've definitely caught a lot of fish on that one as well.
So that's when they get up super shallow.
I'd say 5
prior
feet or
to the
less.
spawn.
Yep.
Or during the spawn. Okay.
Right up to when they're on beds.
Okay, I'm glad I circled back, but we got to keep moving. We're running out of time. Well, we'll stay as long as this takes because this was pretty informative. So let's talk summer or let's talk just post-spawn. What's going on?
Post-spawn, the fish get kind of lethargic. It's called the post-spawn blues for a reason. That time of year, I'll start looking at, the weeds on Candlewood haven't gotten up yet. If they have, we're really lucky. But usually, mid-June, weeds are, probably 2 feet off the surface, maybe 3 if we're lucky. So they're not really using it permanently yet. Fish get on that first break line and get under docks and on hard cover, dock chains, stuff like that. That's when, your Senkos, your straight tail worms, some slower stuff is going to come into play. But once they start to get in the grass, like once they really start using the grass, that's when you can get into the spinner baits, the top waters, and one of the main things, probably my favorite way to target them is this little dude right here. This is that's a Yamamoto.
Oh.
The Yamamoto D-Shad. This is literally the only soft jerk bait that I use.
Jeez. Okay.
It's
Listen, we just had another podcast and they were talking about the caffeine shad. So now I had to buy a bunch of caffeine shads because that's all he threw. Now I got to buy these.
These all right. So I will say a caffeine shad's pretty good.
But it's not as good as that.
It's not the D-Shad though. It's just not.
What size is that? 5-inch?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. 5-inch.
Standard 5-inch D-Shad.
D-Shad. $8
honestly,
a pack for 4.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem, right?
Right.
Anything Yamamoto costs an arm and a leg. He knows what he's got. So, and the cool thing about these is they're super versatile, right? So, and I'm sure the caffeine shad has similar properties, but it doesn't have the salt content or the density that these guys have. So, it's essentially a Senko in the shape of a minnow. But I have a kind of unique little system that I use for these guys.
Okay.
It may not seem like it because it's basically the exact same thing that you would normally fish on a Texas rig. I mean, no weight in a Texas rig, but these weigh quite a bit, so I can use it on bait casting gear, no problem. 15-pound test, no problem. Again, I use straight fluoro pretty much with everything on Candlewood that I can, just because the fish are pressured, and fluoro seems to help with that. But one of the big things that helps me, so a lot of people think of fishing a fluke style bait, a soft plastic jerk bait. They think about fishing it fast over the grass, right? You're jerking your rod tip. You're literally seeing the bait 2 feet under the surface. You're watching fish come up and blast it. I do not fish it that way anymore. I used to, but this new method has kind of steered me away from that because I'll get bigger fish. I definitely catch bigger fish doing this than I would targeting more active ones. So I use a beefy hook. That's a flipping hook right there. That's a Superline EWG 4-aught.
Okay.
And just Texas rig it like that. But the main thing, so one, it's giving it more weight, right? So this is sinking at quite a rate. And the second is so a lot of guys will say, okay, well, you can add a weight to it. You can, put a weight in the back, put a weight in the front as far as nail weights are concerned, or you can have a belly weighted hook. And it doesn't distribute the weight evenly on these and it affects the way that it falls. This is evenly distributed weight that's just the right amount to make it fall faster, but not affect that really erratic descent that these have, moving back and forth in the water column.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to dead stick these quite a bit. Not just quite like a Senko, but I mean, you can fish it like you would fish a Senko, you know, just kind of cast it out there and let it sit there. You give it like 10 seconds after the initial cast and a couple of little twitches, and then, you know, another 5 or 6 seconds and a couple little twitches. They will yank the rod out of your hands fishing this thing, as opposed to, you know, your standard fluke where, you know, a lot of times I've found what happens is and it's probably because they've seen so many, they'll come up chasing the fluke. You get 5 or 6 of them chasing it. And then all of a sudden, they just disappear. I'll throw that in the same areas where I found those fish, and I'll catch like every single one. They really seem to, I seem to have figured something out with this.
I'd say.
And I hope it helps people out there.
I appreciate you sharing that. Yes.
Yeah, no problem.
Wow.
It's a really unique little deal, and you can do it with kind of any color too. Like, people think that like flukes, like, you know, I mean, 95% of the time I see somebody fishing with a soft plastic jerkbait, it's white.
White, yep.
And I've caught them on every single color in that thing. I'm talking like I throw.
What are your top? What would, you know? Listen, I can't buy 15 different colors, but I want to buy 2 or 3. What would you recommend?
So white's definitely one.
Okay.
That's gonna mimic, you know, shad, you know, 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
If there are alewives in the body of water you're fishing, that's it. Don't even get anything else. That's blue pearl.
Mm-hmm.
Buy that and buy all of them.
Okay.
You're welcome, Gary.
Well, it's December 9th right now, and so I get the upper hand before this goes live on the 12th. So I'll have 2 days to find these little Hermes and these D-shad stuff. You know, I'll get it figured out. Hopefully there'll be some left for everyone else. So white, blue pearl. What else?
So this, the one I was showing you before, this is green pumpkin blue. Mm-hmm. That works really well. And then this is another one. What's this? This is olive shad. Olive shad works pretty good too.
Olive shad, okay.
Show you that one also.
Yep.
Another solid bait fish color.
Mm-hmm. Good
thing about the green pumpkin is if they're eating bluegill, they'll still eat the green pumpkin one pretty good. It's a little more versatile than, you know, your solely bait fish related colors.
Mm-hmm. Say, what's the shallowest and what's the deepest that you've had success with that bait?
So the cool thing about this system with that Superline EWG, and sorry, I got hair all over it. It's on the tying bench. I can fish that in 20 feet of water if I'm really patient with it, because of the salt content of the bait as well as that weight added from the hook. So I do fish it for schooling fish when they're post spawn and off of the grass, in that, you know, 20-foot range as well, because right after the bass spawn, once the grass gets up, the alewives spawn on Candlewood, and the alewives will just group up in these big pods when they're spawning offshore and even in the grass a little bit, and that's kind of when these baits shine. But when they're down, you know, over 30 feet of water, when they're down 20 feet, I could still fish that through the school. And I could also fish it in 2 feet of water, no problem. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and I've caught fish doing both. It's a versatile deal. I really like baits that can be versatile, or can be the little subtleties that you can use to improvise and, you know, use to fish a bait in deeper water, or a bait that you can fish, you know, like I was talking about with that finesse Swimbait deal during the spawn, you know, using it to fish for pre-spawners and spawners at the same time. That's a lot of the stuff that I try to use to kind of maximize my fishing time. There's 2 populations of fish on Candlewood Lake. One's the population that stays in the weeds all year. The other is the population that gets out of Dodge. And there's ways to fish for both of them. The fish that stay in the weeds all year, you're either going to get on, you can get them flipping. Believe it or not, Candlewood, I catch a lot of big smallmouth flipping weeds. You can catch them on a spook or, any sort of top water over the weeds early in the morning, or, taking advantage of those low light days where you have cloud cover and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they roam around a little bit. But I really enjoy fishing offshore. So if there is a population of fish living offshore, I'm going after them. I just have to. I can't help myself. That's typically, a drop shot, a swim bait, a spy bait kind of deal. You can get them dragging a tube. Those are really the main things that I'll have tied on when I'm looking for fish offshore in the summer.
So after the summer and we start to get into the fall months and the water starts to cool, I'm assuming that's September-ish, somewhere in there for you?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the year. September can be pretty hot sometimes.
Right.
Definitely October. This year there was still like an amazing flip and bite in the beginning of October and still tons of fish in the weeds. But usually what happens is the weeds start to die off that time of year and the fish start to, evacuate. They'll get on those rock walls that kind of parallel weed lines. They'll again use those road beds to get out into the deeper water from the shallower water. And again, it's really hard to beat, your standard 3.8, 2.8, 4.8 size paddle-tail swim bait when they're moving out on that type of structure.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, deep cranking can definitely get them going. If you've located a school of fish that's moved out and it's just kind of chilling off of a spot where they're moving from the shallow water into the deeper water, you can get them kind of fired up with an 8XD, 6XD, even in some spots. All kind of depends on how deep they are. The Megabass Deep 6 is pretty good too, but there's a solid deep cranking bite on Candlewood that time of year. And they use that stuff to move back out to their wintering areas. So before you have to slow down, you can fish a swim bait a little faster. You can pop a tube off of the bottom a little more aggressively. You can fish a football jig, but again, fishing it a little more aggressively than you normally would because the water's still got, it's a little on the warmer side. You're talking like in the 60s range. And then once they kind of get out to where they're going, once the lake decides to actually start turning over and really get turned over, that's when you get back into the slower stuff, using metal, using a blade bait.
Mm-hmm.
One of these guys, it's a Binsky.
Yep. Is that
your
blade bait of choice?
Honestly, I have a lot of different ones that I use. The Zamiki Vault's pretty good. There's a bunch. Honestly, they all work pretty well. Mm-hmm. I don't really. The old headed sonars and the silver buddies, those are the tried and trues, I guess you could say. But I don't think I have a real preference as far as a company for a blade bait. They're a hunk of metal.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go broke buying the $17, $18 ones that are out there. I can't even imagine.
Right.
People actually spend that money on them and lose
them
they
do.
First cast.
They do.
Yeah, I know it.
I promise you that. Oh man. Okay, we're definitely approaching the time limit here, Mike. Good stuff. Seriously, really good information. I hope the listeners and viewers learned a lot on this episode. We got 2 more to go, so don't. Maybe 3. I haven't decided if I'm going to cut her off on the 26th or go into the 2nd, but we will have season 2, which is basically talking with some of the top local and regional tournament anglers across the country. And I started already recording for that season, and it looks like we're going to be doing it more every other week instead of a weekly show, because this is just too much. I'm going broke. Listen to guys like Mike. If I had to do this every week, my tackle bill would be way too expensive. I'm going to use that as the excuse. Or the other excuse is it's a lot of work to do it on a weekly basis. So I hope you guys don't mind. We're still going to bring some great content moving forward. for season 2. Mike, before I let you go, I got to ask, what is your personal best on Candlewood?
Personal best smallmouth is 612. Personal best largemouth is 8-1.
Nice.
So,
those are some big fish for up there. What'd you catch that smallmouth on?
I caught it on a 3.8 Kitech.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So what if I told you, Mike, next year you can only fish for smallmouth on Candlewood with one bait for the whole season?
The whole season?
What are you going to pick?
Oh, boy. That is a good question. I guess I'd probably have to go with a 2.8 Swimbait. The Kitech 2.8 fat end bag. That guy right there. As long as you'd let me rig it different ways.
Absolutely. So how would you rig it?
I mean, the standard way is a football head.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a football head with a 1/0 hook, kind of creep it around. The reason I say that's probably the bait that I would use is because, you know, in the spring I've caught fish just kind of literally just literally creeping that around, like not even reeling it, just like literally dragging it, just like I would fish a hair jig or a spider grub or, you know, any of those smaller finesse baits. You know, I could definitely catch fish on it during the spawn pretty darn easily. I've caught fish dropping it vertically next to docks and stuff like that when the weeds haven't been up yet. Again, same deal, either a ball head or a football head with a 1/0 hook, either an 1/8 or a 1/4 ounce, depending on how deep I'm fishing. There's also times where I could fish that like up in the water column, keep it in the middle of the water column. So I think it would be pretty versatile. At least let me cover 2/3 of the water column rather than. I mean, I would be missing out on the top half, which would be a real shame. But oh well. Right.
It's always interesting. I love hearing what everyone's answer is to that. We've had a lot. I mean, we're 50 podcasts in for the year, and quite a few anglers mentioned the Swimbait would be one. Of course, I think the two, maybe the drop shot would be right up there as well with the top baits if they had to for the whole season. Well, good stuff. I'm going to actually offer you coming on a future live maybe in the next couple of months, guys. What do you think? I think we need to get you back on and talk a little bit more technical stuff and maybe get into some of the hair tying and how you go about that. I find that really fascinating. So I'd love to welcome you back on the live show. Let's do that before the spring if you're up for it.
Oh, absolutely.
That'd be so cool. So how can people follow you, get a hold of you as far as what you have going for next season?
Sure, yeah. So I run a guide service on Candlewood Lake part-time. I am, you know, one of those guys that works a standard Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, but I really enjoy getting people out there on the water. So my guide service operates pretty typically just on weekends. You can follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Fishing with Weensy and get a hold of me through there. DM me. We can chat about, you know, if you're interested in getting out on the water. Though my schedule is already kind of filling up for next year, believe it or not. And that's about it. Love to chat with all you guys. If you ever have any questions about fishing, particularly about Candlewood or any of the bodies of water in Connecticut or New York, at least you know, the lower half of New York, give me a shout. I love to chew the fat when it comes to fishing.
Will do. Well, thanks again, Mike, and thank you everyone who's stuck with us all season long. I promise you we got more amazing fish conversations moving forward with the Smallmouth Crush Podcast Season 2. And as always, until next time, we'll see you guys on the water.
Thanks so much for listening today. Make sure that you're subscribed to the show and follow us on Instagram at SmallmouthCrush. Also, the YouTube channel, SmallmouthCrush. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating and comment with a review below. And as always, until next time, we'll see you on the water.